Welcome back to Trucking and Politics, folks. I am going to name this video a future history lesson. People say the number one way to predict the future is to look at the past. Immediately after World War II, we had a time of industry growth like the country has never seen before. It produced a generation aptly named the boomers. The nation's debt fell, the GDP rose. Just a short time before this, during the last days of World War II, the United States developed the atom bomb. I remember watching a documentary about that, and the scientists that developed it said they were terrified to ignite this bomb. Nothing had ever been developed like that. They didn't know what would happen if the atom got split. One scientist even said that he was afraid that it would ignite the atmosphere, set the world on fire, and end all life on Earth. He also said we didn't have a choice. The United States was in such an economic decline. Everything was going to the war effort. Food was being rationed. The war was raging on to the point where there was no reasonable end in sight. The U.S. was about to collapse, and the world itself was about to collapse. When those two bombs got set off, it changed history. It ended the war. It started a movement in the United States, a conservative industrial revolution. The GDP grew like no other time in history. The nation's debt fell. It was just like it was called by all historians at the time, happy days. This rise continued on until the early 1960s. This movement, in my opinion, ended on November 22nd, 1963. On that day, our youngest elected president was assassinated. He also went down in history as the youngest president to be assassinated. It started the movement that ended the conservative movement. It was a movement called the progressive. Kennedy, during his presidency, did not want to escalate the war in Vietnam. It was reported his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, wanted to pull the troops out of Vietnam and just end the war. Kennedy gave him the consent. Before that could happen, Kennedy was assassinated. Under the next president, Johnson, the war raged in Vietnam. Kennedy thought the war was pointless, I guess. Johnson saw it as, we'll bomb the hell out of them and we'll win the war. Johnson proved to be wrong. His approach was wrong. Ultimately, starting in 1969, Nixon started pulling troops out of Vietnam. And continued on until the early 1970s, when almost all of the troops were pulled out. A lot of people say that it was a pointless war that should have never began. It was a war that could not have been won by any measure. I think Nixon wanted to try a different approach to end communism. Even though Nixon was a Republican, by a lot of standards, he was still a conservative. He wanted to start a movement of peace through appeasement. He met in 1972 with China's CCP chairman and set up trade negotiations with communist China, which continues on until today. Ever since Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, this progressive movement has raged in the United States. The economic repercussions, in my opinion, has devastated the United States. This era, this period of time after World War II, was a booming era for the United States. GDP growth was enormous. The debt was falling. The country was on track to be great. It was on track to be the greatest nation that ever was. And it made a hard left turn in the 1960s into this progressive movement of appeasement. Our GDP has continually fell. It's obvious why. All of our industry is being shipped over to China. Our products are being made overseas. In layman terms, there are no good jobs left in the United States. We have shipped our GDP overseas. In my opinion, this is a time that Ronald Reagan talked about in the 1960s. It has come full circle. Reagan tried his best, in my opinion, to bring those days back after World War II, to bring those back into the United States. He was successful in part, But the progressive movement was just too strong. He couldn't push it down. In the early 1980s, when he was elected, this country was in dire straits. It was a horrible place. You could not find a job in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, the late 1970s. It was economic disaster. Reagan started bringing it back. He was looking at the United States as a country that needed a shot in the arm. And we definitely needed it. The thing that worries me about it right now is this progressive movement, in my opinion, is dying, is faltering. What happens when you approach a wounded animal? When you approach a wild animal that's got its back against the wall, that feels like it has nowhere else to turn, it lashes out. That's what I worry about with these people that are hanging on to this progressive movement. I don't think they're just going to fade away quietly. I think they're going to lash out. They're not going to go down without a fight. That really worries me. It really does. And this video, I'm just going to keep it short because this is a prequel to another video, like I said, that I wanted to lay out some facts in, to show a chart, to explain more what I'm talking about and what we are about to look forward to in the very near future. We're there. Right now, we are there. We have a huge choice to make. It is almost like the choice that they made in 1945. It is that dire of a situation in the United States. They didn't know what to do. And they made the choice. I think it has become a time now where we are going to have to make another choice like that. Not hopefully with a bomb. That is my worst fear, is that. Is the pending doom of World War III. Because there was a quote from Albert Einstein that said, I don't know what weapons will be used in World War III. I don't know what type of fight that will be. But what I do know is World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. We don't want a World War III. We don't want that. I'm going to end this video with a quote from a speech of Ronald Reagan's. And it's something for you to think about. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this. But every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is a specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face. That their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat. Eventually, we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? When Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be, he has told them that we are retreating under the pressure of the Cold War. And someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary. Because by that time, we will have been weakened from within, spiritually, morally, and economically. That speech was made in the early 1960s. Do you not see the resounding similarities to now? Do you not see that we are now in a time of choosing? I'm afraid, I am really afraid that we are on the verge of having to make the ultimate choice. I hope that this progressive movement will just fade away and the reign of the conservatives will just take off again. That's what I hope. My better sense says that they're not going to go down without a fight. We shall see. Look forward to the video that I'm going to put out showing what the consequences of the GDP versus the nation's debt has. It has a very dire consequence to it. Look out for that video, and we'll see you on the next one. Be safe out there and take care.